So you saw it. Quebecers have decided big time for the Liberals. Now the fallout, including a special Monday nighter for At Issue. Chantel's in Montreal tonight. Bruce is in Ottawa. Andrew is here in Toronto. I guess the question that a lot of Canadians outside of Quebec are asking tonight is this question about sovereignty. Does this mean, after a stunning defeat for the Parti Québécois, that the sovereignty issue is put aside for quite some time now? Chantel?
Oh, yes. And it is a message to the baby boomer generation that has been leading the PQ, the Parti Québécois, driving the Charter, that this project, if it ever sees the light of day, will not see it on their terms and probably not in their lifetimes. It's probably the most crushing blow to the sovereignty movement and the Parti Québécois since they lost the first referendum in 1980 by a margin of 60-40.
Andrew?
This is on top of the debacle in 2011 with the Bloc Québécois. It's on top of a succession of relatively bad results for the PQ, but it's never been quite as resounding as this. This is the worst popular vote showing since they started contesting elections. And it's not just a no to separation. I think you can say quite clearly this is a yes to the status quo. There were no offers on the table here. There was no open federalism or fiscal imbalance money. There was nothing except Canada as it is. You had the quite stone face of the Harper Conservatives in Ottawa, which was supposed to be a terrible thing for federalism in Quebec. You had the most unambiguously federalist campaign I've seen from a Quebec Liberal leader, actually praising bilingualism in the middle of the campaign, and yet look at the result we're at.
So, but what does it really mean, though, in the end? Is separatism dead? Is sovereignty dead? I mean, we know that those who have tried to play that card before have lived to regret it. Bruce?
No, sorry.
Well, I do think this is the coolest point in time that we've seen towards the idea of separatism that I can remember. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that feelings in Quebec towards Canada, towards federalism, aren't particularly warm. So there's always the prospect that this agenda can come back. But Chantel touched on something that I think is really a very important narrative. When I was a young boy growing up in Quebec, young Quebecers were the vanguard of idealism. They were the leaders of the idea of change, and they embraced this idea of Quebec as an independent country, as the vision that they wanted to be propelled towards, or to propel towards. These days, they're still idealistic, but they're idealistic about other things. They've made it clear that this is not their agenda. They have economic anxieties, they're concerned about the state of the planet and the world, but not about Canada and Quebec.
Chantel, you want to add on that?
We didn't talk about the Charter. Remember that card that was supposed to win the election?
Right.
Not only did it not win the election for the Parti Québécois, but it also drove away scores of younger voters, the party of choice of younger voters. And I don't just mean those who are 18, I mean anyone under 55. In all those age categories, the PQ was running second to the Liberal Party. No one seemed to think that was important around Pauline Marois, but you have to think that this is where you look to the future and you think it's a pretty glum future for the sovereignty movement.
And those strategic miscues, the bringing in of Pierre-Carl Pelado, the Charter, they didn't come from nowhere. They came from the fact that the PQ's base is not wide enough as it is. They've been averaging 30% of the vote in recent elections. These were desperate attempts to try and broaden that base. Nobody can predict the future. Nobody can say with any certainty that sovereignty, separatism is just going to go away. But it doesn't mean it can't either. The Quebecers always have been and always will be nationalist, but they were nationalists long before there was such a thing as separatism. If it didn't exist before, it's not inconceivable that it could also not exist in the future.
What is the Marois legacy after tonight? I mean, I guess it's easy to say she had a terrible campaign.
No. It's
okay.
more than that.
Okay.
She has taken a pound of salt and salted the ground for the sovereignty movement. She's going to leave behind, and she will be leaving, if not tonight, at some point in the not distant future. She will be leaving a PQ divided over our main policy, the identity policy that is the Charter that many sovereigntists dislike, a PQ divided between its social democrat past and Pierre-Carl Pelado's recruitment and what it says for the future, and how all these factions can come together when they don't have the glue of sovereignty anymore to bind them together, I don't know. But she leaves the PQ in worse shape than any other PQ leader in the past.
Is it all her fault? I mean, the leaders have to lead and leaders have to be responsible. But
well,
does she wear all this personally, Bruce?
Well, she owns colossal blunders, no question about it, Peter. I think that going into the last year's election campaign, there was a feeling that she could have won more handily than she did. But since then, I think she had an opportunity to look at what's been happening in elections over the last several years in other jurisdictions in Canada. There's been a message there that incumbents, if they want to hold power, almost only need to be reassuring to not look like they're going to do radical things. And of course, in introducing Pierre-Karl Péladeau, he got an F on an "I'm not for radical ideas." That set the wheels in motion for the defeat that we saw. But I wouldn't ignore also this notion of the values charter and what it says to young Quebecers who live a life in diverse communities every single day. It just wasn't an agenda that would reach out to them.
Andrew?
I don't think you can hang it all on Marois, but on that wing of the party and those leading lights in the party who said that this was the strategy we had to take. They had read the previous cataclysmic defeat of André Boisclair in 2007 as being he'd been too liberal, he'd been too wishy-washy, too multiculturalist almost, and they had to go harder into the identity sphere because that's what had worked for the ADQ before. Well, okay, it didn't work going the one way with Boisclair. This clearly has not worked either, going in the other direction.
Yes, but she wears it because in the case of the charter, Jacques Parizeau, Bernard Landry, Lucien Bouchard, Gilles Duceppe, find someone and amongst those elder statesmen of the Parti québécois that did not come out publicly to say this is wrong, this is a bad idea. They've all said it and they were all ignored. And at that juncture, you can't say, well, it's not Pauline Marois' fault because she was being pushed by everyone to do this. On the contrary.
Yeah.
What happens to PKP, to Péladeau? What he wins tonight, his seat. I'm not sure what else he
win in
won, if
quotation
anything.
marks.
But what happens to him?
Well, he will have a limousine because he can afford one. So that's all good. But the problem is that people are talking about the PQ as if something normal has just happened and they just move on and Pierre-Karl Péladeau takes over. I'm not convinced that many of the members of this party will want Pierre-Karl Péladeau now that they've seen his negative impact on their own election prospects in this campaign. So I'm not so sure what his future is.
I mean, there'll be presumably a push, at least among some of the party, to say we have to find some way to make a rapprochement with Quebec solidaire. So it's the same analysis as the Conservatives went through 20 years ago at the federal level. And that's obviously very hard to square that with the right wing of the party that's taken them in this other direction.
All right, quick last word, Bruce.
I think there's no chance that he'll want to stay in politics without running for the leadership. But the leadership of that party for him means finding common ground with people with whom he disagrees on many fundamental issues, the left side of the PQ party in particular.
All right, listen, thank you all. You'll all be back Thursday around the table this time, and we'll be able to talk about the guy who won tonight, Philippe Couillard, and what his first days are like and the things that he says in the news conferences that are bound to follow in the next couple of days. Thank you all, Bruce in Ottawa, Chantal in Montreal, Andrew here in Toronto.